to avoid. Oh, there he is. Oh no, Sam Seder. What a nightmare.
Here he is, ladies and gentlemen. The real Uncle Sam, my real uncle. He's here with us on this joyous occasion. Well, not necessarily a joyous occasion, but it's a joyous occasion when you're on. But the things that we will be talking about, the things that we're going to be talking about are not so joyous overall. So, Sam, for those of you who don't know, it has a show called The Majority Report. I love The Majority Report with Sam and Emma and everyone else. Great show. Watch it all the time. Big fan. And I wanted to have Uncle Sam on because people were saying he's a Zionist, which I thought was very funny, but that's not the real reason why I'm having you on. It's been a while since I've had you on, and I wanted to just check in, see how you guys are doing over there.
It's a show right now. It's really, we're all doing fine on our show, but it's a really ugly time, and to have to watch this every day, it's just it's painful to see this type of suffering. That we, with our tax dollars, with our government, are enabling in many respects, and so that's difficult. But all things considered, we're doing okay.
A couple things I wanted to get started on. So, given your background as a Jewish man who was an anti-Zionist himself, I wanted to ask you a couple things because I feel like you can speak to this issue as far as like the reception from the audience in a way that I cannot, given my background as someone who is Muslim. Like, I feel like there are a lot of people who are going to be more receptive considering your track record in the space, for how many years you've been engaging in commentary and also being a professional speaker. I think that I just wanted to touch base on your perspective on some of these issues, starting off with Jonathan Glazer's speech. Did you watch Zone of Interest?
I did.
He won, I think, Best Foreign Film?
Yeah, I think Best International.
Best International?
I don't watch the Oscars as a rule, but I did see his speech. Obviously, it's clipped. And I certainly, the big part of his statement, which was, I think, by some people misconstrued and other instances like purposefully misconstrued, was that he had said, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, but he said, we stand here. Now, of course, the guy, he's just done, I think it was like a 7-8 year long project for him. Zone of Interest, could have been 10, about Rudolf Hess's, based upon a novel about Rudolf Hess, who was the commandant of the death camp Auschwitz. And his family lived right next door to Auschwitz. And the film is really like a commentary on sort of the banality of evil, to use Hannah Arendt's title when she wrote about Eichmann, but about the living next there and how they just sort of live their lives, without. And so the guy's, he's steeped in this, and he said, we stand up here, I think he was talking for his producers, and refute our Jewishness and the Holocaust. And that's where, apparently some reporting put a period.
Yeah, the Hollywood Reporter, I think, or no, Variety did that, which is insane. This is a premier establishment journalistic outlet for all things Hollywood. The fact that they would flub this quote, I don't think it's a mistake. I just I can't chalk this up as like a simple mistake. I think that they wanted to draw that out. Like, this is a trade publication. That is what they wanted to draw out of that speech.
Whether it was just like incredible incompetence or nefarious, regardless, people ran with that. And the actual statement was, we stand up here and refute our Judaism and the Holocaust being used as a shield or a justification for, the onslaught, I don't know how he phrased it, in Gaza. And so the idea, and that's a sentiment, I think that, frankly, a lot of Jews in this country and around the world feel. You hear a lot of the protesters yelling, "Not in our name." That's what they're talking about, is that the idea of killing civilians and what Israel is doing is really fundamentally contrary to, I think, a lot of people's perceived ideas of Judaism.
Yeah.
Aside, and certainly to see the Holocaust, which is, I went to Hebrew school 3 times a week as a kid, but it was Hebrew was about like number 3 or 4 on what we learned. We learned about the Holocaust. We learned about Israel. Then he and then cultural things about Judaism. And when I went to Hebrew school, it was only 30 years out from the Holocaust. I mean, I was 10 in 1975. And so, I had teachers, Hebrew school teachers, with a number tattooed to their arm. And the message of the Holocaust, at least that we were taught, was never again. But it wasn't just about Jews. It was supposed to be, never this type of wholesale slaughter. And so to see these things invoked as a defense or a justification for this genocide in Gaza is beyond the just sort of, I think, you don't need to be Jewish or religious or anything to find what's going on there abhorrent. But it's one more sort of indignity.
Yeah. I wanted to show you another thing from Variety. I'm going to share my screen with you right now so you can see what I'm seeing, at least. Here it is. This is the same Variety trade publication that claimed IDFA's artistic director apologized after protesters crash opening night with banner calling for destruction of Israel. Now, the banner that was calling for the destruction of Israel, of course, read, and this is back from November 10th, was, of course, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Now, obviously, discourse has changed from back then, but if you recall, this was around the same time when Rashida Tlaib was censured. But as a trade publication, they still went along with this narrative that, like, saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is actually calling for the death and destruction of Israel at a time when this was the hot button issue. So. Right. Just some ways in which I think even areas that you would not expect being political while using neutral language and objective reporting from a trade publication that is supposed to cover Hollywood, still making an assessment, making a statement, and showing bias, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I mean, without a doubt, you don't need it to see it just in the context of Hollywood. I think particularly, there may be a slight change in tone in some of the news media, I think, as of late. But certainly at the beginning, and there's always been this sort of deference to Israel. And as someone who was steeped in this as a kid, it took a long time, I think, for me to be fully conscious of that, of just how steeped it is. I mean, I always knew there was a bias, but I think you're really seeing in this conflict, because everybody seems to be weighing in. I mean, you mentioned I've been doing this for a while. It's actually going to be the 20th anniversary of the Majority Report in 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow.
And when we started it on radio, Janine Garofalo and I co-hosted the show. And I think we were one of the few, I mean, it's certainly even on the network, without a doubt, but anywhere on commercial media, I think we were one of the few outlets where we would regularly criticize Israel. It was not necessarily in
vogue.
It definitely wasn't in vogue, but my critique, I think, has gotten more sophisticated over the years. But we got a call the day after we said anything negative about Israel from the Israeli embassy. And they wanted to send the ambassador onto the show, a guy named, I think it was Pincus. And I think he ultimately did come on to the show and listen to our critique. I mean, I was very critical of Sharon and at that time and the occupation, broadly speaking. But I don't know that I had as much clarity on the history. I mean, I had a good friend who did a documentary about.
To be fair, I will say this. What you're talking about is a time that literally predates the new historian era of Israeli history, I feel like, or was right around the time when
that happened around in the 80s and 90s. But I wasn't, at that age, 80s and 90s, I'm still in my teens, early 20s, and I wasn't. But it was there. I had a friend, a guy named Benny Bruner, and you can see his documentary he did. He was Israeli. I want to say Dutch, and he did the documentary that is available, or he's done many, but one which really struck me was called The Great Book Robbery. And it's a documentary about trying to establish that there was, in fact, the land was not empty. There was a Palestinian culture. There was a Palestinian civilization. They had, and he makes that case through all the books, Palestinian books that were stolen and are actually stored in a subterranean level in the Israeli National Library that you really can't go in and see. It was very enlightening to me, because as a kid you're taught like the land was empty, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, for a what is it, for a land without, for a people without land, for a land without people, or land without people, for a people without land.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, my critique has evolved over the time. Like I don't, I mean, I think you saw this exchange I had the other day on my show. I never labeled myself a Zionist, although I think maybe I don't know that I was ever a Zionist. Different people had maybe draw the distinctions at different points, but I never labeled myself an anti-Zionist, because I don't feel like I have to participate in this concept. I believe in democracy, and I believe in human rights. And I believe that if you're occupying, land illegal, it's illegal. And I believe in the concept of settler colonialism, and I can make an assessment. So I think to the extent that I've been called an anti-Zionist, it's more by people who call themselves Zionists. But I don't have a problem with it being called an anti-Zionist, but it's not something that I spend time identifying myself with, because frankly, rhetorically, I don't find it particularly effective. And if it's not effective in me helping change people's minds, then I don't employ that type of stuff. But it's been a very clarifying time where people stand, and surprising in some instances too, to be honest with you.
Do you mind elaborating on your own personal journey? I've talked about mine as far as like overcoming national mythology and nationalistic myths that you learn from an early age, as someone who's Turkish, who grew up in Turkey, who was a product of both the private and public education system in Turkey. I have talked about my understanding of the Armenian genocide and what was taught to me, how my opinion on it evolved from an early age, despite the attempts of indoctrination. And I was wondering if you, because I think there's a very good parallel there with respect to the Nakba, and also Israel's ongoing occupation as an apartheid regime, the way that this has evolved into full-blown fascism, in my opinion, in the words not just of mine, but also a friend of both of our shows, Dr. Ofer Kasif. I think that it could be illuminating for people who are on their own journey of self-reflection and education, for those who are maybe on like the precipice of understanding, despite indoctrination from their schooling.
Sure. Yeah. Like I said, I'm 57. So
it doesn't show.
When I well, thank you. I appreciate that. When I was in elementary school, I mean, I went for Hebrew education 3 days a week after regular, public school, until probably, I think I was like I think I went through most of high school even, and Reform Jew. And people 30 years out, I mean, we're still very much steeped in the Holocaust. And the idea of Israel that I was taught was a plucky sort of like David and Goliath story, and Israel surrounded on all sides by its enemies, and how much the Arabs hated the Israelis and the Jews. And it was presented as if this was a sort of like an eternal struggle of religion, and that the only thing that really saved the Israelis was their sort of like superior will, and they were lucky because their enemies were not terribly smart. Like, I just remember being taught this story about the Golan Heights, about how like the Israelis had spies who convinced the Syrians to grow trees on the Golan Heights because it would provide shade when they were fighting. And so the Israelis knew where to fire their weapons. I don't know how that story worked, but this is, you hear it as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of questioning, like, wait, how did the Jews get there? Or like, how many, like, it was all just the Holocaust happened. The UN said, here's Israel. And then the Arabs were mad because they don't like Jews. There was no sort of material analysis of like, hey, wait a second, how did they, we were told it was just a desert. And they came in and they created irrigation, they grew stuff and
turned the desert into a fertile land or whatever.
Exactly. And I was 15 or 16 and went with my Hebrew class for the summer to Israel, which is like a confirmation class program. And we traveled up and down the country. We worked at a kibbutz for a period of time. And it was in 1982. And at one point, and I feel like it was early on, I can't remember exactly, but I feel like it was early on in the summer. We were up in Caesarea and we were in the ruins of this like Colosseum. And we saw dozens of attack helicopters going low across the Mediterranean north. And we're like, what's going on? I mean, it looked like something was going on. I mean, because Israel, everybody, you had soldiers, everybody, they carry their guns around and you get used to that, after a while. But like this was something different. And within, I don't know how much time it was, not long. Maybe we got into the bus or I can't remember. We found out that Israel had attacked Beirut. And I just remember I was crying about it. I got into an argument with my rabbi because prior to then, it was a preemptive war in '67, but it was being sold like it was imminent, and the Israelis just got the jump. The idea was that it's the Israeli Defense Forces. They don't start wars of choice. That's not what Israel does. And that was my whole sense. And I think that was probably the beginning of me becoming increasingly more skeptical and curious as to like, how did this form? And, I went to college and there was really not much, for whatever reason, I don't know. It was not, I don't remember studying much about it in college. But I was aware, I think, through the first Intifada that this was. I mean, things felt like they were changing maybe a little at that time, and then I remember when Sharon went on the Temple Mount and basically basically lit a fire, and became increasingly critical of Israel during that time. And I think the Bush administration was the first administration where I became aware that they were, and probably through interviews I was doing with people on the show, that they were not fulfilling the role that the U.S. had in the past, which was to sort of like pull Israel's worst inclinations back from the brink. But we're instead sort of like pushing them, like giving not just pulling the keys away from your drunk friend, but handing them the keys. Despite the fact that you bought the car for them in the first place. And for, by, the Obama era, it was, I would talk about Israel to some extent. To some extent, it was farmed out to Michael Brooks, who was, by the time we got into like the end of the Obama administration, was hosting the show once a week. And he was, had studied foreign policy and was much more, I think, sort of engaged in it. And I think to a certain extent, I had just basically given up on Israel. And my disposition was basically, I mean, I remember distinctly having arguments about this with, because among Jews and on like email groups I'm on, this would come up. This is sometimes the biggest like political difference I would have with people who in many other ways were, progressives or, liberals or
progressive
whatever.
except Palestine.
Yeah, and I mean, I distinctly remember the argument I would take with some of these people is like, you're the one who's endangering Israel, the existence of Israel, because this cannot go on. The Democratic Party, it was clear, like to me, like when Tim Kaine refused to go see Netanyahu speak in Congress, I was like, if Tim Kaine's doing this, you guys have a problem. And because Israel is going to become increasingly isolated, and 10, 15 years from now, you're going to have the Christian Zionists in this country. But if a Democrat is in power, they're going to lose their funding, and they're going to get increasingly isolated, and it's going to be like a South Africa type of situation, except for they won't take that off ramp.
Well, it turns out they showed you by being like, nope, unconditionally in support of Israel, actually, as the Democratic Party.
I I think that we are now at the
Turning point.
apex of that support.
Yeah.
Yes,
No,
I think
absolutely.
we will never have a Democratic administration that will even come remotely close to how the Biden administration is acting. I think,
Absolutely.
Biden, I think I don't know why, but has some unique. I mean, you
Deference.
saw that story in The Internationalist. It's written in this book by Alex Ward, maybe. Have you
When
heard
he
the
took
story?
Menachem
That
Begin? Yeah.
Begin and you've probably recounted it, but it was when Begin has to be the one saying to Joe Biden, like, "Hey, take it easy. We don't do that. Even though you're saying it's okay for us to kill women and children, we don't do that." When Begin has to be, and this is the guy who was participated in the blowing up of the Hotel David
Yeah.
in 1948. I mean, if that guy has to be the voice of reason, you know that Biden's got some particular, like, I don't know, bloodlust. I don't know what it is, but I
I
think
think Ryan's assessment on your show was actually pretty interesting, where Biden is known as a cipher, right? Like he always finds the middle ground on every issue, and he's just like a perfect political machine in many ways. Whether it was busing and segregation, desegregation, back in the day, all the way to super predators, crime bill, noticing that like learning a lesson from the opposition that he had to Afghanistan and not repeating it with Iraq. I think all of this stuff played a role in him developing his positions, but Israel was never really an issue that the Democratic Party had even shown a little bit of criticism on, with, I guess, like, ironically, Obama being considered the exception almost. But like, even then, Barack Obama, obviously on his way out, gave $30 billion in a 10-year aid package to Israel for the Iron Dome and numerous other instances. So like, I think he never had like a reason to develop a middle of the ground approach. So that just kind of stuck with him.
again, that story about Begin, where you get admonished by the leader of the country to be like, no, we're not going to be that vicious. We don't want to associate that. There's something else going on there. And I know Peter Beinart came on the program and he had a good explanation. He's like, if you want to know, you want a sense of like where people stand on this, the 1619 Project is a good sort of surrogate in which to assess. Like, if somebody fundamentally cannot believe that the United States was founded appreciate the sort of like settler colonial origins of the United States, and that it's built on the genocide of the indigenous people here. They will not be able to get it with Israel either. They're just too invested in the sort of like that myth. They can't give it up.
They're just riding for all settler colonial genocidal states.
I mean, if you're going to do for one, you might as well do for all.
He loves Australia. He loves it all. He doesn't care. He's like, it's great.
Now, it's the best we could do at the time.
He needs that Neil Gorsuch approach, and just like being the one pet issue that he cares about that is the exact opposite of what you would think from him. But it is interesting because like he claims to be Irish, he claims to be Catholic, and these are like currently with the Pope and also with Ireland being historically an ally to the Palestinian plight. It is very odd that he would take such a staunch ultra nationalist approach to the matter.
And the thing is like it is. I mean, I don't think Donors explains it. I mean, I know that he's got some big, Haim Sibin or Sibin or whatever that guy's
but that's
name
consistent.
is. But I think it's very hard to understand because from a U.S. national security standpoint, there really is not a sense that this is in any way helpful whatsoever.
Oh yeah,
Ilan Pappy we had on the show. He's like, when has Israel ever been helpful from a U.S. national security standpoint in terms of like in practice, right? Its existence. There's an argument. Maybe there's a beachhead there within, and one more opportunity to control, the oil of the neighboring countries. But I don't think he would have paid any type of like political price if in November 15th, he had said, we're calling for a ceasefire. I don't think he would have paid a political price. We're going to start to pull back on aid, or we're not even going to put an aid package on the table. I mean, it really is hard to understand. And it is just from a political standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like the Lloyd Austins in his corner, I think are like genuinely warning him of the backlash and the destabilization that Israel's actions are causing, because it is like Israel's aggressive ethnic cleansing campaign is now far beyond the point of maintenance and avoidance. We've now gotten to a point where it's like it's an issue that you have to tackle head on. But beyond the lack of like Israel's position as an apartheid ethno state is actually helping America with a beachhead or a forward operating base with like its own espionage tools and whatnot. The destabilization it's causing is obviously far outweighing the benefits that you get from like the Pegasus program or whatever, right? But beyond that, and this is something that you and I 100% agree on, it is horrible domestically. It is playing so poorly because every single instance where Joseph Robinette Brandon goes on stage and says there are red lines, but there are actually no red lines, like he did on this MSNBC interview, the Saturday Show with Jonathan Capehart. When he says that, it shows incompetence. It looks like he's an old man asleep at the wheel, which is why someone like Donald Trump, who also obviously benefits from not being the president while this is going on, still is like outperforming Biden by 10 points on the issue of Israel, because at least he has consistency in the eyes of those who are being polled on the matter, where like Trump is consistently bad on Israel, but at least he's consistent. He's showing strength and support for Israel. Biden, on the other hand, is losing the demographics that he obviously needs for re-election, whether it be the Arab vote in key states, whether it be the pro-Palestinian vote, as a younger demographic is clearly overwhelmingly in support of Palestinians now. He's losing out on these key demographics in all states, but especially so in places like Michigan, obviously, and even Minnesota. And it is entirely, in my opinion, due to the fact that he looks weak and he looks like he's asleep at the wheel, because what he's saying does not match what people are seeing. Every time he says, oh, Israel, I called him a son of a bitch, or whenever you see a leak in the news about how like he's really going to change pace on Netanyahu's actions in Gaza, and then you see more children being slaughtered, you see more women and children being ruthlessly massacred, you see the flower massacre that occurred at the humanitarian aid convoy. People are like, well, what the fuck is this guy doing? You're losing out on both ends at that point. The other thing I wanted to say, Benjamin Netanyahu's reaction also consistently undermining him makes him look, even on the international stage, it makes him look like we can't even control our attack dog at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've been saying for a while that I think like even the age stuff with Biden is fundamentally the subtext there is leadership, right? Yeah. Like, look, if I think somebody can do the job, I don't care if they're 110. It's a leadership question. And so, he botched this, in my estimation, with the immigration thing too, because he was out there saying like, I wanted them, like I was willing to do what they wanted to do, but I couldn't convince Congress to do it because the guy who's not president is in charge of them. And it's like, well, wait a second, dude. All you're saying is, if we want action on this, hire the leader who has control of Congress.
Yeah.
And this whole thing with Netanyahu, it plays into that same thing where it's like, you say they shouldn't do this, they do it, and you're just like, they shouldn't do it. All you're, putting aside all the sort of like, the
immorality.
And the concrete aspects of this. The subtext is, I have control of this situation, not a leadership position. And I think that's I would say that from the general electorate, even if they don't care about the Palestinians, they're seeing somebody who is somewhat feckless, or the news media is seeing someone who's feckless. And this basically becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yeah.
Like you that narrative gets established and they start to apply it to everything. And then the other thing is, you said like, how it's hurting him electorally. I think it's hurting him electorally in that way, in terms of that sort of subtext narrative. I think it's hurting him. And I think it's, who knows how many actual votes he's losing for this. But I do know that in talking to, sort of like more or less normie to progressive Democrats who are in the sort of like organizing space, it's depressing them. Even if you don't lose all of these votes directly, the second order issue is that the people you need to go out and inspire people to vote for you are just feeling like my stomach's churning because, and these are the people who are paying the most attention to what's going on.
Yeah, that's why the Vote Uncommitted campaign is so significant, in my opinion, which the media is now like no longer covering as much, in my opinion, after Michigan, which I suspect could be deliberate because it is the exact type of drama that they love, that brings in ratings and like shows a little bit of chaos going on. But these are not uncommitted voters, uncommitted to the Democratic Party. I mean, these are voters who are committed to the Democratic Party, because the real uncommitted voters just don't even go out and vote in the primaries, and there are many of them, right? That's the average voter. That's the reason why the primaries are not attended as broadly as the general election. And these are the people who lead the activist base, the progressive base of the Democratic Party, who are likely Democratic Party voters, in my opinion. And regardless of our opinion on this matter, that assessment has also clearly been made by the Biden administration as well. Like I think they are genuinely seeing that, and it is definitely causing a little bit more chaos and a little bit more fear, even though it seems like Biden personally is like a very vindictive and very stubborn person, if we're going to get into the palace intrigue of it all. And I think that is what's motivating him, given the New Yorker magazine piece that came out like last week, where he openly said, well, I don't care about the polls because guess what? They were wrong in 2022, which they really weren't. And that they and they were wrong in 2020. So why should I listen to them now? I don't know. It's just, it is very terrifying that they're banking on people just simply forgetting what is going on in Gaza by the time November comes around.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. I know guys like Biden, in that age bracket, maybe related to some, and there is a quality of like, hey, maybe you don't need to drive at night as far as you're driving or attempting to drive. It's not a problem for me. Look, the problem, the dent on that car is because they're making parking spots, smaller. They're making them narrower. That's the problem, not my driving. And there's a real quality to Biden about that. Like the guy is, I don't know if he's ever been particularly flexible, but in this instance, there is a certain, I don't know. I mean, there's a certain, I think, delusion. Maybe you see a little bit of like, they feel like they need to pay a little lip service. But the amazing thing is too, is that like, what makes them think this is going to end? They can't have thought in November that, okay, this is going to go until next November and we'll just deal with it. They had to have thought, like at one point they were like, this is going to wrap up by January. This is going to wrap up by March. I mean, I think there's reporting that said that was their belief. And it's quite clear that Netanyahu has absolutely zero incentive to do anything of the sort. And here's the thing that really scares me too.
Netanyahu also likes Trump. Netanyahu would benefit from a Trump re-election.
100%. 100%.
I think he's open about that too. Like, I think the reason why he keeps saying no two states immediately after Biden says there will be a two-state solution, which in and of itself is already like a contested concept at this point because of, what the two-state solution in theory versus what it looks like in practice is very different. It's just been a continuation of settlement expansion under the guise of like a potential two-state. But beyond that, it's just very obvious that I think Benjamin Netanyahu comes out and says the things that he said yesterday, specifically because he wants to undermine Biden.
Oh, I mean, look, I think it's a huge twofer for him to embarrass Biden in this way. Huge twofer. And I think he probably calculates the longer I hang in here, the better for Trump. And then ultimately the better for me. I'm not convinced that whatever forced Hamas to make this attack and this timing knew that this was also going to put the United States in a difficult position and put Biden in a tough position. I can't imagine they ever thought that he would be this sort of like all in. But it seems like the Biden administration just they did not calculate this, and they didn't even appreciate the situation. I think Biden walked back from this red line thing, my understanding, a little bit later today, or at least the administration did. But
I mean, he walked back on it in the interview where he says there are red lines, and then he goes, but there are no red lines for weapons delivery. So there are no red lines then.
Technically, he said no red lines for defensive weapon. He said like the Iron Dome. And I don't know. maybe I was parsing that too.
I think that is that is the legalese. That is the legalese that they engage in an effort to say, oh, we're sending Israel, and you've talked about this before. We're sending Israel defensive weapons, actually only defensive weapons and not offensive weapons. We're just like replenishing their munitions that are depleted in defense of Israel. Why are those munitions being depleted? Well, because they're using those weapons in a forward posture in their illegal occupation and further ethnic cleansing in Gaza. I think that's like a way to get around.
There are specific armaments for Iron Dome, right? Because I'm looking down the line when somebody in the Senate is going to raise this bill. I don't know when it's going to be, but they're going to say, we're cutting off all weapon sales except for these specific armaments.
The Tamir interceptors, I think they are specifically.
Yeah. And so, something to that effect. Now, do I think that Biden is sincere with this? I doubt it. But the fact that he's having to articulate this stuff and try and put himself in a position where, because they must be looking at this going like, we've underestimated this on some level. And what are we going to do if this is happening in June? What are we going to do if this is happening in September? Where do we go? What is our fallback? But here's my big fear too, is within a month or two, we're going to have this, temporary pier built so that U.S. ships can come and offload aid. It's unclear to me how that aid's going to get off that temporary pier and get distributed. But it seems to me that both Israel and Hamas have great incentive to mess with that, to involve U.S. Military personnel, to blame the other side. I remember when Reagan sent peacekeepers into Lebanon and 250, I think it was, Marines got blown up. Reagan could get away with something like that, and leave. But Biden, he may have to go the other direction. Like, the idea that we're even coming even remotely close, never mind what we're doing with the Houthis, but the idea that we come even remotely close to getting involved in an armed conflict because of this is just, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing that there would be this level of risk taken on by the United States when the alternate is we cut your weapons, send the trucks.
Exactly. It's just like it's taken a long way to grab your ear grab your left ear with your right hand. It's just like there is no reason to get into all of this and basically make this process infinitely harder for yourself and convoluted and potentially really devastating. And this is the fundamental question that really frustrates me when no one asks this question to Biden directly in media, which is, why is there need for a pier to begin with? Are there no humanitarian aid convoys that are waiting? Why is there even a need for aid in Palestine? Let's ask that question. Is this a natural disaster? Is this, is this a byproduct of a typhoon? Did an earthquake happen there? Or is it actually our ally engaging in a deliberate, calculated ethnic cleansing and ethnic displacement campaign? Oh, I think my dog groomer is here. 1 second.
Good. I mean, dog groomer aside.
He just knocked like the cops for a second. Hold on. I'm going to run this video and hear Biden's thoughts real quick. You can see it as well. And
Prime Minister Netanyahu, as Israel defends itself from Hamas terrorists who murdered more than 1,200 Israelis and still hold more than 100 hostages.
What is your red line with Prime Minister Netanyahu? For instance, would invasion of Rafah, which you have urged him not to do?
It is a red line, but I'm never going to leave Israel. The defense of Israel is still critical. So there's no red line. I'm going to cut off all weapons so they don't have the Iron Dome to protect them. There's other ways to deal with the trauma caused by Hamas.
But the red line is Rafah. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu joins us live from Jerusalem. We don't have to give you the news. You follow American news as if you're still here, Prime Minister. His red line is Rafah. Don't go into Rafah. What's your response?
Look, the president and I have agreed that we have to destroy Hamas. We can't leave a quarter of the Hamas terror army in place. They're there in Rafah. This would be equivalent to saying, after the Allies fought back, gone through Normandy, went through Germany, and you'd say, well, we'll leave a quarter of the Nazi army in place and we won't go into Berlin, the last stronghold. So I think that if the president means by that we should first enable the safe departure of the civilian population from Rafah before we go in, we agree with that. We don't need any prompting.
That's not what he said.
Let's make sure that
but that's not what he said. He doesn't want you to go in.
You know, I think you have to ask him what he said, because he agrees. He said that he agrees that we have to destroy Hamas as a fighting organization. That's what we intend to do. Look, it's either Israel or Hamas. There's no middle way. I mean, deep down, everyone in Washington understands that. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to defeat Hamas. We're going to do what is necessary to minimize civilian casualties, do the humanitarian aid, something that we believe in. But we have to destroy this terrorist Nazi army. Otherwise, there's no future.
It's crazy that they just have direct line to Benjamin Netanyahu.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he's actually just in an office at Fox. But what's also really telling about this is his analogy as to why they have to keep going into Rafah, as if the United States, left 1/4 of the German army, operating, or wouldn't go into Berlin. And I hear this quite a bit when people justify like how much destruction Israel has wrought in Gaza. They'll cite Dresden, or they'll cite Nagasaki or Hiroshima. And the idea that you can justify this carnage by comparing the threat between Hamas and Germany and the Imperial Japan is just absurd. It's just absurd. And they've got to make that leap to justify it, but it doesn't work. I'm sorry. It just doesn't work. It's not the same.
It's wild for a couple different reasons, including something that Biden himself mentioned, which is that we wrote rules after, like he literally said that in an interview, if I recall, where he was talking about the Dresden comparisons ahead of time. Like he was getting ahead of that narrative because he's heard it so many times probably that like, one, we did write rules, new rules of engagement after that. And two, this is one thing that always frustrates me about the comparisons to the Holocaust, which Benjamin Netanyahu, as I'm sure you know, is a Holocaust revisionist himself. So this is something that he likes doing regardless, is that if there is a group, if there is a militarized state that is like engaging in ethnic cleansing and ethnic slaughter, the comparison falls not on the hands of a resistance group that will take it to violent means, built originally by like fundamentalist guys as well, for sure. It's the other side. It's Israel. Like Israel is infinitely closer to the mechanized slaughter than Hamas is. Neither of which is, I'm saying, identical, obviously, to the atrocities of the Holocaust. But like one side is clearly closer to the Nazi regime than the other side.
Power differential. You look at the power differential.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just what it comes down to. I mean, just look at the power differential and who has control of their territory and who does not, and who, where the mass starvation is happening and where it's not. I mean, the power differential is quite obvious. This is not a world war. This is a highly sophisticated country with far more advanced weaponry than maybe anyone else around, frankly, in that neighborhood. And certainly, more so than Hamas. And again, you're not going to completely eradicate them. And the idea that that Hamas is some type of sort of like alien force that can be Israel, it is almost impossible to imagine that Israel hasn't created 5 different variants of Hamas in what they have done to the population. It would be astonishing.
Yeah,
Israel
Hamas itself.
to think.
Hamas itself is an evolution. Hamas's tactics itself has become an evolution due to Israel's increased violent actions. Like, I think Zach Foster, I don't know if you've ever had him on your stream or not, but Zachary Foster is a professor. He's a PhD at Princeton, a historian of Palestine, and he has like documented each step in the evolution of Hamas all the way from the Islamic Charity, which it began as a Muslim Brotherhood cutout, all the way into like the old charter, new charter, and how Hamas changed its tactics throughout time as a consequence, as a reaction to the Israeli negotiations peace process and the obvious continuation and the rapid expansion of the settlements, and also Israel's suppression of like religious freedom and whatnot in the West Bank, and how it became what it is. Everybody understands this. Like everyone in Israel understands this. Former Shin Bet officials understand this reality. And Israel itself understood this reality in its outward communication to the Trump administration. One key detail I bring up from time to time is that I believe in 2017, Donald Trump no longer was giving any aid. I think due to one of his campaign promises, they were going to completely shut off aid to Palestinians. Do you remember this?
They stopped funding UNRWA.
Yeah.
They cut off funding to UNRWA.
Yeah. And you know who was actually against that at the time? The Israeli government. The Israeli government itself had petitioned the Trump administration to not cut funding because they recognized that this would be a national security issue for Israel if the Palestinians were completely starved out, that it would become, the situation on the ground would get worse. So the fact that Israel in 2017 recognized this reality, and yet the outward communication coming from Benjamin Netanyahu and others within the Israeli government, including the defense minister, is the exact opposite now. It genuinely, I think, shows that the situation has gotten worse and the fascism has completely taken hold.
I think if people can understand the concept of Donald Trump doing whatever he can to get elected president so that he can stay out of jail, which I think a lot of people can, then I think you can start to understand and doing whatever he can despite what it means for the country, the future of the country. Then I think you can begin to understand Bibi Netanyahu, because I think for him, the more turmoil, the better for his personal lifelong trajectory. I think he knows that the moment there is any type of calm, any type of peace, any type of argument that there is, no immediate threat, I think he knows that his chances of going to jail are, through the roof at that moment. And so I think he's going to maintain as much belligerence as possible. I don't know if Joe Biden can't see what just about every observer of, I'm talking Israeli.
Yeah.
The Israeli press knows this. Netanyahu is hated, but they're not going to get rid of him until this, war is over.
Yeah.
And so he is completely incentivized to make sure that never happens, regardless of whether it's in, whose best interest it's in. It's a disaster obviously for the Palestinian people, but it's gonna. I think it's a disaster for Israel, and it's a disaster for the U.S.
No, absolutely.
At the same level, but
I think here, one last thing before I let you go. Thank you so much for coming on for as long as you have. One last thing I wanted to talk about is, I guess, like liberal Zionism used to be the primary communication to the Western world. And I feel like post October 7, but even before October 7, like in the last couple of administrations, liberal Zionism kind of like went away as far as like a Hasbara mechanism. And I think it is that arrogance that was born out of the unconditional support to the Western world that's shown Israel, and the nature of like reactionary fascist ideology constantly increasing the pressure points and squeezing as much as squeezing the Palestinian population as much as it can and also endlessly propagandizing that in a self-reinforcing mode of propaganda. I feel like this created an attitude that is also playing into Israel's demise, because like without Western support, obviously key Israeli officials understand without Western support, Israel does not exist in the way that it does. No way, no how. Whether it be political cover that America offers, more importantly than anything else, or whether it be the direct weapons shipments. People will say it's only 5% of the Israeli defense budget. Doesn't matter. It is far more important that America is always providing political cover for Israel and also offering weapons. And I think that the liberal Zionist exit ramp here is so clear to me. Lay the blame almost entirely on Benjamin Netanyahu and bring in Benny Gantz, which they're kind of doing now. I think they're positioning Benny Gantz as like the new leader because they had Benny here and talked to him directly, right? Kamala Harris met with him. And yet it's wild to me that Biden has not been pushing that exit ramp that has been given to him that allows Israel to continue being an apartheid state, that, allows Israel to continue doing what it's been doing to the West Bank, which then, of course, invokes reaction, understandably, from the Palestinian resistance groups, both in the West Bank, but more importantly in Gaza. And then, you can go back to business as usual. But the bloodlust that you're seeing from Benjamin Netanyahu, and there is one part that he is right on. He might not be a popular figure, but his actions are popular, especially
100%.
amongst the Israeli Jewish demographic polled consistently on the matter. They want him to be doing ethnic cleansing. They think it's not hard enough. They think he should go even harder.
Yeah,
So
80% of the Israeli population. I mean, that's the other thing, is that like Gantz is there, but like what's the coalition they can put together? I mean, increasingly Israel's Jewish population,
their
it's
demographic terms, not ours, obviously. It is an ethno-state, so
right, more and more conservative, fasci, authoritarian. I think you had a huge influx of people who lived under the Soviet Union and were raised in that system, which is basically a crash course in being authoritarian. And they're brought over into Israel. And I think that like having a massive influx of folks like that into your body politic will have an impact. I think there was, tendencies amongst the Israeli population, as it were. Also, fundamentalists who've come, 15% maybe only from America, but a very loud and vocal and intense dynamic. Religious fanaticism breeds fanatics. And so all of these factors are working there. I'm not sure that you would see any change of policy whatsoever with Benny Gantz. I don't know if that's even an option that exists anymore, but it seems to me you could have the Biden administration could have definitely been more aggressive with Israel up to this point and not paid a political price. I don't know what they think they're doing from here on in. It's a show, and I can't see how it gets better.
I don't know if I agree with you on the USSR take. I don't know if it was the Soviet migrants that came in, considering that there is a massive population of Mizrahi and Sephardi Jews in Israel that came from, like, Arab Jews specifically. They
came years and years ago.
No, I know, but I feel like in the indoctrination, especially as far as I've read into it, and you're very knowledgeable on this matter, maybe I'm misunderstanding something, but as far as I understand, their integration into Israeli society in order to overcome like being second-class citizens, being regarded as like the same barbaric scourge that the rest of the Arab Muslims and Christians are in the eyes of like the fascist mythology that they were developing in Israel, for it to be an ethno-state. I feel like that integration process caused many, like the Ben Gvirs of the world, to be infinitely more reactionary than like some of the older population of like Ashkenazi Jews even.
That may be the case. To some degree. There may be but I think the inclination of new immigrants, Avigdor Lieberman, and you got and that whole influx of settlers, right? I mean, that was part of the project of putting boots on the ground. I would imagine.
Oh yeah,
a significant portion of those settlers.
It still continued to this day. Like the Russian like passport cycle is like still very much in existence. It's like a weird like white supremacist in the way that we understand white supremacy here in the Western world, here in America. Like it's almost a continuation of similar policies to like make Israel more white seemingly. I think that
Right.
is definitely like a genuine interest by some in the Israeli government, like a deliberate attempt.
Yeah, no, I think so. I would like to see someone do a deeper dive into that. I've always been looking around for like how has these shifts in demographics impacted Israeli politics, and maybe someone in Israel has done it, but I haven't come across it in these parts. But dude, before I go, let me plug this GoFundMe. Would you?
Yeah.
A friend of mine has been helping a family in Gaza, and we're starting to see more of this actually. But they're a family that have a child with Down syndrome, and we helped them raise some money to get them out of the country. I'm sure people know the dynamic that's associated with getting out through the Rafah gate. And we got them. They just literally just got footage of them at the Rafah gate, and almost the entire family is out. They're going into Egypt to. They have nothing. There's a video I have of that. Like they have 6 bags, and they were in a tent in Rafah. It's a weird dynamic because there's so much pain and suffering there, and to focus attention or help on any individual family, it sort of cuts both ways. But I don't know. It's been at least gratifying to know that like you can directly help some people. If even a couple of bucks, help them get settled, and know that you managed to save some of these people and given them an opportunity to sort of like normalize and deal with the trauma that they've been going through.
Yeah.
I just saw some video of their little girl, and it really is, it's amazing, but it's so horrific. But if folks have the opportunity, please.
Yeah, mods are pumping the link in the chat as well. Well,
Great.
Sam, thank you so much for coming on. Always a
Ron,
pleasure
always a
having
pleasure.
you here.
Great to talk to you, and keep up the good work, man. I really appreciate what you've been doing.
All right, thank you.
For
Sam.
years now. So yeah, hopefully I'll get out there soon. I want
Oh, hell yeah.
to see your
That'd
place.
be great.
All right, man.
All right. Have a good one. Bye. That was Sam Seder, everybody. My real uncle, Sam Seder, and not my fake imposter uncle, Chunk Weigert, doing the most. Very reasonable voice. I always appreciate Sam's commentary and takes on the matter because, like, I think he has a way and he has the background of doing this for many years. I think that, he has a way with his words, with his commentary that appeals to a lot of people, I think, that are maybe already negatively polarized to the things that I have to say. So great stuff.